That game of pickup basketball or ball hockey may seem like just a bit of fun and exercise. In fact, it has the potential to do much more for those taking part and for the wider community, according to a new book by Perry King. He is a journalist and now author of Rebound, Sports Community, and the Inclusive City. And we're pleased to bring Perry King to our studio tonight. Nice to meet you, Perry.
Nam, it's really nice to be in the studio. How are you doing?
I'm great. Congratulations on this book. We have a lot to get into. But before we begin, I wanted to read something that you wrote in the book. Head into any gym, whether Missouri Cohen or the school court at Oakwood Collegiate, or baseball diamonds at Leaside Park, the cricket pitches at Eglinton Flats, and you'll see it. Pick a place in the Greater Toronto area that evokes memories. The time you played pickup basketball at the courts at Dufferin Grove Park, or that time you sat to watch kids, maybe even your own kids, play pickup hockey at Ted Reeve Community Arena. Think of each and every road run, either for charity or for your own health and well-being. The sights and sounds are unforgettable. The dribbles, the yelling and hollering, the ringing hollow of aluminum bats and the hockey pucks, the smell of sunflower seeds and hockey sweat, the sheer joy on children's faces, the frustration of grown men wallowing in defeat, incredible dives for frisbees and rugby touches. At the best of times, sport, the act of organizing and playing with others, is the lifeblood of a place. I love that passage.
Wonderful.
How is sport the lifeblood of a place?
You know, I think it's just a reflective of any place. And I know that the book writes about Toronto ad nauseum and the GTA ad nauseum, but I think it really could apply anywhere. Anywhere in North America, anywhere in America. It's a reflection of the people that live there.
Why does sport matter?
Sports matters because people matter. Sports are a matter of people coming together and galvanizing together to create something. It's not just about playing something. It's about how, for example, a Tibetan community can come together in a community, organize a tournament because they know that their kids are playing basketball and they can have a basketball tournament within their facilities, and they know that it can get hundreds, maybe even thousands of people in one place in order to talk about different ideas, not even just about the sports itself, but how Auntie is doing, or about, what about that signage above that store? It's a place where you can really have really good, diverse conversations.
And even the places that I mentioned, that the baseball diamonds at Leaside Park, it feels as if those places, I think we kind of take these places for granted. Maybe we don't. They're in the community, but they seem to be just more than buildings, more than parks. What are these places to our cities, our communities?
They're a reflection of our ideas. They're a reflection of planning over many years. Governments take these things into consideration. They have master plans that outlay decades over decades of ideas of how to shape the land, how to actually put something in the ground and build it, whether it's a rink or a community center or a gym, but it's also a reflection of what people would like to have. One of my favorite stories within Rebound is about the Go Green Youth Center. It's based in Thorncliffe Park, which is a newcomer community in a sense, but it has hundreds of thousands of different kinds of people, many of them new Canadians, many of them racialized. And there's this field close to Valley Park Middle School, which is close to Don Mills in Overlea. It was a facility that wasn't taken care of for a very long time. But after some inspirational movements by people in the community to plan and rehabilitate the land, they realized that people wanted to play cricket.
Right, and cricket is something that you write about in this book. We're going to get to that in just a few moments, but I wanted to get you to tell us this story about Sammy and Lou and Eastern Commerce.
Endings. So there's a lot of to be said about what the future holds, but it's about how things end and how things continue. Sammy is a fantastic basketball player. She came alive at Eastern Commerce when their girls program was kind of in a full flight mode, and they won a couple provincial titles. And it's a place that she thinks about and refers back to on a frequent basis. It's a real center for her. And when she signed to go to Virginia Tech, because she chose that over a couple of universities, over Yale, which is everyone's decision to make.
Yeah.
No knocks against Yaleys or anything like that. But when she signed there, I don't think many people outside of the community knew that the school was coming to an end, that the program was going to be shutting down, that the school itself was going to be closing, and that was going to be the end of that.
I mean, I grew up in London, Ontario, and we knew about Eastern Commerce. The school had an exceptional basketball program. So why did it end?
It ended, there are different theories. The foregone theory is that there wasn't enough funding to supply the school itself. The basketball program was kind of propping it up a little bit. And stories throughout the last year of that competition was, they would fundraise on their own. They would try to get their kids into tournaments in order to get them to college, whether it's in Canada or the United States. That was accomplished. They got their kids wherever they needed to go. But essentially, it was a journey where they had to compete and be this together cohesive team within these circumstances. It was a really unfortunate one.
You tell several basketball stories, and I think for some people we might think, oh, basketball is just a game, it's inconsequential. But from the stories that you tell in the book, it's a lot more than that. What is it? What is basketball about?
I think it dials into something that I don't think has been reflective of not just Toronto and the GTA, but of the province. That it's a game where people can access it, can begin to play without all that much equipment or stop time. You just need a couple nets, maybe one if you're going to play half court, a ball, and a few people to kind of get people together. And I think that's reflective of who is playing the game. It's reflective of racialized communities, of different kinds of communities who are looking for something to do or looking for something really well organized and well implemented. It's something different within the city that I don't think is reflective of the history of the city. We kind of consider Toronto to be a hockey city or a city of rinks, of which it has a lot of rinks. But I think the movement of basketball has represented something completely different over the last, I wouldn't say the last 10 years, I would say over the last 40, 50 years.
What has it represented? Because
I feel like it's reflective of Black culture. There have been many communities within Black communities here in Toronto that have been able to kind of come together and organize this game. Maybe they see Americans play the game and they were inspired to play it through those means. But if it was this or soccer or some other sport, it was an opportunity to come together that wasn't being presented at large by the opportunities created by governments or by the city or by communities. It was something that many racialized communities, for example, came together and really put their minds to. And there are really great examples over the last 40 years of great organized play. Great players who have come and gone, men and women, who have really put their imprint on the city. They seek real inspiration here because it was a place of real opportunity, a real great chance to kind of make it a part of who they wanted to be.
You also mentioned hockey, and we know that Canada is a hockey country, but you also write about ball hockey, and this is something that's played a lot in Brampton. First of all, why is it played, what is ball hockey, and why Brampton?
Okay, so ball hockey it's not all that complicated. So there's no ice. It's just a ball. Maybe it's like a lacrosse ball or something really hard.
I can play that because I can't skate.
Me neither. Me neither, unfortunately. I've tried. And it's just played in a rink, usually when arenas are more quiet during the summer. They're organized there. But it's funny because it became a place where a lot of people were taking up the sport. I discovered that a lot of Canadians play the sport in Peel region, and I wanted to explore that a little bit within the book. And there's some great examples with the Calsa Cup and speaking with former players and stuff like that. I think there was a great movement to be had, and ball hockey in this region is some of the most played worldwide. But it also got me to think about one big thing. So why are they playing this? Why aren't they playing ice hockey? And
what's the answer?
Discrimination in some sense,
because Brampton is a predominantly South Asian community.
It is, or maybe a lack of a welcoming environment within ice hockey itself. There are larger questions there, but if you speak to some people, not everyone is going to have the same experience with it. Some people felt unwelcome, or they felt the strife and microaggressions that come up, racial taunts. Cultures within youth hockey are really competitive, and sometimes there's hazing. There's a lot of things within the sport that didn't make it welcoming for people. And for example, South Asian Canadians chose to play ball hockey ad nauseum.
So they had like a little bit of remix to it. You mentioned cricket at the very beginning, and cricket is another game that the South Asian community has been playing in Toronto for many years. Tell us about like a short version of the history of cricket in the city.
I think it's more reflective of the history of Toronto itself. I know that we're on Indigenous land, but this is a British colonial practice that has been here for quite a long time. It came with the British, obviously, and with British immigrants, and it's kind of reflective of that kind of colonial kind of relationship. In current manner of day, it's reflective of different kinds of communities. Newcomer communities and new Canadians have brought this game to this country to play it, and they've found places to play within the city. I mentioned Eglinton Flats there in the excerpt that you read, but there are examples over time that groups of people would come together to play cricket, but they wouldn't play it on a traditional cricket patch or anything like that. They would play in a parking lot. They play on the street. They play on a TDSB field that wasn't regulated for it. They would find places to play regardless of the obstacles in their way, and I think that's really right.
And you kind of explained the game to me because I always find it a little bit confusing. Yeah. But if you want to understand cricket, Perry has a great explanation of how it's played in the book. The pandemic, it's been like on month 50,000. But it's one of the things that it did was it kind of curbed our ability to play sport within the communities. You mentioned that $400,000 in fines were collected by the city from people who were breaking social distancing rules, and half of those were for using park amenities like exercise equipment and basketball courts. That sounds like a huge number. Does that shock you?
That's a really good question. I don't know if it did. I know that we've had to kind of really think differently during the pandemic, and I think through maybe an early run where we're thinking about making sure that people are not in common spaces, spreading a virus that we knew little about, that maybe more fines would build up over time. But as we've kind of explored what we needed through the pandemic, what those revelations were telling us, I think it's more reflective of, okay, so people need public space. They need a place to go. They need a place to be themselves, be with people in a distant way. The city is a complex one. It's not just like dense condos or built-up communities. It's full of a bunch of space, a bunch of empty space. Some of that space doesn't have benches or anything like that, but it's in spaces that are in flux. Like they're not, in terms of realizing what public space could look like and how we animate those spaces. People have tried to play in these spaces and they've been fined or they've been policed or over-policed by the police.
It kind of, I think we've had this conversation before on the show, that who is public space for? Because throughout the pandemic, we were told, stay at home, stay in your bubble, but if you need to, for your mental health, because we do live in a city where people live in dense communities, go outside for your mental health. Yet when things reopen, golf courses and tennis courts open before playgrounds and basketball courts. What did that say about what is seen as valuable in our society?
Well, it says a lot about how we don't value what racialized communities, queer spaces, indigenous spaces actually need in order to function or have a livable kind of city. When they say that golf courses, of which there's a substantial amount, and they could be public spaces, the potential to transform them into accessible spaces for communities that live around those courses and on those courts, there was an opportunity there to rethink something, at least in that moment, to give people an option to be active, to have a healthy lifestyle, that kind of thing. But to see the lack of support for public spaces in this way has had some consequences.
What are those consequences?
I think people they're going to private spaces. They're going inside. They're sedentary. There are bleed over consequences that are unfortunately.
And of course, it makes me think of kids because we've been hearing kids are resilient, that, they're going to be fine. But yet when everything shut down, if your kid was in a rec program, those were canceled. What did children and youth lose as a result of not being able to access recreational activities during this pandemic?
Well, it was reflective in the participation report card. I know that the 2020 grade was a D-, something like that, close to a failure. Which is weird because you'd think that all these resources at our disposal was leading to kind of better opportunities for kids to take part in something. But it's reflective of maybe a lack of opportunities being presented to kids, and not even just kids with privilege. But
what do you mean by that, lack of opportunities presented?
Well, in terms of what programming is available in public facilities, for example. And if community centers are supposed to be hubs for great programming, for great community interaction. But because those places and spaces were closed, kids who would generally use those would be somewhere else. And in some cases, they could be in a place that is maybe more troublesome or on the street. those lack of opportunities were clear and present. And it's kind of reflective of something even more. So where are our children, where are parents and families putting their energies now? How can they balance out what they need in this regard with everything else that is being presented to them? It's a very difficult thing to kind of manage. Some people can't make that decision. Some people don't have the opportunity to make that decision. Some people are choosing to just focus on school or focus on another thing that's in their life. And sometimes that has consequences. Those things suffer.
Is this something that worries you? Because I know that sport for me as a young person really helped to increase my confidence. And my kids were in rec activities. My son was playing basketball, and when the pandemic happened, had to be pulled out. Sport has played a huge role in your life. You love sports. You love this city. Is this something that keeps you up at night?
Yes. I care very much about the city. I really do care about making sure that there's a generally better health profile, a city that is more livable. It's not even just about playing a sport, and they're putting their energies into something that develops their leadership skills and their relationships with other people they wouldn't generally know. Sports is a great opportunity and probably the best opportunity to engage in those kind of ideas. The fact that it's being removed or being cut back time is very finite, and better decisions have to be made, right? So I want to say that we have all the resources at our disposal in order to create a better environment for kids, but for people of all ages to better engage in sports in some kind of way. It's not even just about engaging in activities to get yourself to the pros. We don't necessarily need that, although we can look to it as, for some answers, and teams like the Raptors and Jays could have a role in how we develop that kind of infrastructure. But there's got to be a way to organize and get together in order to create ideas, in order to have a better, healthier lifestyle.
We have about 30 seconds left, but you talk about in the book about how sport can be used as a tool in city building. How so?
I think when students, teachers, parents, different kinds of groups understand that this is a concern that needs to be galvanized with, when they organize and get together, they can kind of create a case in local governments, but also in provincial governments, because cities are a creature of the province. There's an opportunity there to present ideas that are on the landscape that could be really effective. The Go Green Youth Center example is a great example of that. People who came together, not despite a government hub, but also it became a success because it was well funded by 3 levels of government. That there are ideas there that could be picked up and adapted into a local landscape, something that is custom built for neighborhoods in order to work on. Even developing some kind of charter or something like that. Something that dictates the terms of how we need to proceed is all very important.
And that we can all benefit from.
Absolutely.
Harry, congratulations on your book. And thank you for being in studio with me. It's been
problem.
great to see another person and not on
strange
Zoom.
or?
Yay! It's been great.
Thank you so much.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.